The history of the Arab slave trade stretches across more than 13 centuries, beginning in the early days of Arabian commerce and continuing well into the modern era. It unfolded along the vast landscapes of the Middle East, North Africa, East Africa, and parts of Asia, weaving itself into the fabric of empires, trade networks, and cultural exchanges. Unlike the transatlantic slave trade, which operated within a relatively fixed 400-year window, the Arab slave trade was not tied to one empire or one system. Instead, it evolved through multiple periods of Islamic and pre-Islamic societies, each contributing to a complex legacy that still influences regions today. At its core, the trade was driven by demand for labor, soldiers, concubines, domestic servants, and skilled craftsmen, creating a system that adapted to political changes from the Umayyad and Abbasid caliphates to the Ottoman Empire. Its routes stretched across deserts, mountains, and seas, caravans crossing the Sahara under blistering heat, ships sailing along the Swahili Coast toward Arabian ports, and trading hubs emerging in places like Zanzibar, Cairo, Baghdad, and Muscat. These movements created one of the largest and longest-running forced migrations in human history. In East Africa, particularly in regions spanning modern Tanzania, Kenya, Mozambique, and Madagascar, the trade became deeply rooted. The Swahili Coast flourished as merchants, sailors, and local rulers participated in a system that supplied slaves to Arabia, Persia, India, and the wider Islamic world. Men were often taken for labor in fields, pearl diving operations, or military service, while women and children were frequently sought for domestic work or incorporation into households. Many captives endured long marches to coastal markets, where disease, exhaustion, and violence took an enormous toll. Yet the system did not create large plantation slavery like in the Americas. Instead, it relied on dispersed household servitude, military labor, and concubinage, which made the scale harder to quantify but no less significant in human impact. Some estimates suggest that millions of Africans were taken over the centuries, though the lack of centralized records makes precise numbers uncertain. Across the Sahara, another major network connected West Africa to North Africa and the Middle East. Long camel caravans carried captives from places around Lake Chad, Mali, and Niger toward markets in Morocco, Libya, Tunisia, and Egypt. These journeys could take months with extreme desert temperatures and scarce water, turning the routes into deadly corridors. Many did not survive, and those who did entered societies where slaves filled roles ranging from household servants to soldiers in elite military units. In some Islamic states, slaves could rise to positions of influence, a phenomenon exemplified by the Mamluks, a military caste originally composed of enslaved Turkic and Circassian boys who later ruled Egypt for centuries. This upward mobility, while notable, represented only a small fraction of experiences. The majority remained bound within rigid hierarchies that gave masters control over their lives, labor, and families. Gender played a crucial role in shaping the nature of the trade. Female slaves were in particularly high demand, often valued for domestic service, beauty, or perceived exoticness. Concubinage became a major institution across various Islamic societies, with enslaved women living within households and sometimes bearing children who could become free depending on local customs and laws. While certain legal frameworks in Islamic jurisprudence offered protections, such as prohibitions on overworking or arbitrary killing, these laws were unevenly observed, leaving many women vulnerable to exploitation and abuse. Male slaves, especially in certain regions, could be subjected to harsh conditions such as castration, a practice largely unknown in Atlantic slavery, but significant in parts of the Arab trade. Eunuchs served in palaces, harems, and administrative centers, forming an elite but forcibly altered class whose lives were shaped by trauma. The cultural and demographic effects of the Arab slave trade were profound. In regions such as Iraq during the Abbasid period, large slave populations worked in agricultural projects like the Zanj plantations, where revolts occasionally erupted. The Zand Rebellion of the 9th century stands out as one of the largest slave uprisings in world history, involving tens of thousands of East African slaves who resisted harsh labor conditions in the marshlands of southern Iraq. Although the rebellion was eventually crushed, it demonstrated the scale of the system and the desperation felt by those trapped within it. Across East Africa, the presence of Arab and Swahili traders reshaped coastal societies, influencing language, religion, and architecture, while also redirecting political power towards sultans and merchant elites. Zanzibar, ruled by the Omani Empire in the 19th century, became one of the most infamous slave markets in the world, its stone-town streets and warehouses bearing silent witness to the trafficking of thousands of captives each year. As European colonial powers expanded into Africa in the 19th century, they encountered and sometimes manipulated existing slave networks. Instead of immediately abolishing the trade, some European agents initially used it to secure alliances or economic advantages, especially in regions where their presence was limited. Later, anti-slavery campaigns gained momentum, driven by changing political ideologies and humanitarian movements. Britain, in particular, pressured the Sultan of Zanzibar and other rulers to end the trade, deploying naval patrols in the Indian Ocean and signing treaties aimed at dismantling the system. Nonetheless, illegal trading continued for decades, sustained by profit and demand, and only declined fully in the early 20th century as colonial administrations enforced bans and new economies emerged. Even then, domestic slavery persisted in parts of the Arabian Peninsula, the Horn of Africa, and the Sahel well into the mid-1900s, and in some isolated contexts into the late 20th century. Today, the legacy of the Arab slave trade remains visible in cultural identities, linguistic patterns, and genetic histories. Communities along the Swahili Coast exhibit blended African, Arabian, and Persian heritage, while in parts of the Middle East, descendants of African slaves contribute to diverse national populations. Yet, the topic remains sensitive, often overshadowed by the more widely documented Atlantic slave trade. Scholars continue to reconstruct the history through manuscripts, oral narratives, archaeological studies, and cross-regional analysis, piecing together a system that was vast, adaptable, and deeply interwoven with the societies it touched. Understanding this history requires acknowledging its complexity without minimizing its human cost. The Arab slave trade was not a single event, but a long, evolving process that shaped entire regions for over a millennium, leaving behind stories of suffering, resilience, cultural blending, and historical transformation that continue to matter in the modern world.